This Dicebreaker video is sponsored by Wild Bills. Ditch the manufactured flavors. Your taste buds deserve better. Treat yourself to Wild Bill's premium handcrafted soda pop. Mouth-watering beverages that allow you to escape to the most interesting places imaginable. Cheers to refusing the drink from the mainstream. Cheers to kick-ass canned. Cheers to being veteran-owned and operated. At Wild Bills, flavor isn't everything. It's the only thing. Use discount code CHEERS15 for 15% off your first order.
If you're clicking on this video, that means that you want to learn how to play Magic the Gathering, the seminal trading card game that's been rocking around since the 80s when it was first designed by Richard Garfield. To tell you the truth, Magic is somewhat of a behemoth. There's more than 20,000 cards that have been released since its inception, and with each new set comes new rules, features, meta. It can get pretty confusing, to say the least. But underneath all that nonsense, the base rules of Magic are actually relatively simple. And if you've played any of the card games that it inspired in the last 40 odd years, then you'll probably recognise a lot of them too. So strap in, I promise it won't be too bumpy of a ride, and let's learn how to play Magic the Gathering. Okay, so welcome to Magic. In this video, I'll teach you how to play the standard format, which is the one that you'll spend most of your time playing on things like Arena or games at your local shop. There's loads of different formats that have been invented by fans for Magic, but we're just going to focus on standard here, and then you can learn the extra bits even when you need to. In standard format, 2 or more players will face off against each other, trying to whittle down their opponent's health to 0 to claim victory. You're playing powerful magic wielders battling it out with each other by summoning dangerous creatures to fight for you, casting mind-blowing spells and manipulating the battlefield to your advantage. Assuming that you're only playing against one other player, then all you need to do is reduce your opponent's health from the starting number of 20 all the way down to 0, and then you'll win. If you're playing against multiple players, then you just need to be the last one standing. Each player will enter the game with a deck of 60 or more cards, and this deck is called your library. There might be special rules for what cards you're allowed to build your deck from. For example, some cards are banned in proper tournaments or on Arena if they're deemed too powerful or broken. But it's up to you and your friends or the people organising the game that you're in to decide on those. The main thing that you need to know is that your deck can have any combination of cards and will likely have a good variety of things to mess around with, but you can never have more than 4 copies of the exact same card unless it's a basic land. With both players set up with 20 life points, usually tracked on a d20, and their deck of cards, just decide on a starting player at random and then you're ready to play. A quick note before we properly start, by the way, this is a card game, so pretty much every rule that I'm about to teach you will get broken by certain special cards or keywords. If there's ever any doubt, the text on the card always takes precedence over the basic rules. At the start of the game, both players will shuffle their decks to form their libraries and draw a hand of 7 cards from the top of that shuffled library. This is your opening hand, and you can either keep it or choose to mulligan. Taking a mulligan allows you to reshuffle the deck, the cards that you initially drew included, and redraw your hand of 7 cards. You can do this as many times as you like, but for each mulligan you take, you'll need to take that many cards out of your starting hand and put them on the bottom of your library. So basically, you can either keep the 7 cards that you get, or you can keep redrawing in exchange for a smaller starting hand each time. 7 cards is also the max amount of cards that you can have in your hand at the end of your turn. If you've got 8 or more, then you'll need to discard down. Starting with the first player, you'll take it in turns to play cards, fight with creatures, and so on, going back and forth until someone wins. Okay, let's look at the most important thing in Magic, which is of course the cards. There's lots of different types of cards in the game, but all cards are either permanent or non-permanent. The area between you and your opponent is called the battlefield, and any permanent cards that you play will stay face up in this area until someone gets rid of them. Non-permanent cards, however, will get discarded once you've used them. Your discarded pile sits next to your library and is called the graveyard for spooky thematic reasons. Let's take a look at permanent cards first because they'll be making up the majority of most decks. The most important permanent card that your deck will contain, and usually the most prevalent one in there as well, is the land card. They come in lots of different varieties, but most commonly they're one of the 5 colours of Magic: red, blue, green, white and black. Land cards are essentially your currency in the game. You can tap them, which means to rotate a card 90 degrees clockwise, in exchange for 1 mana. Your average land card will usually give you 1 mana of its colour, so a green forest land card, for example, will give you 1 green mana. Mana is then used to cast spells, activate abilities, and pretty much everything important in the game. It's the lifeblood of the game that you're playing, and making sure you have enough lands to give you your mana on your turn is an important step to winning. You can play 1 land card per turn for free, but any others that you bring onto the battlefield will have to be through special spells and card effects. The second most important permanent card is the creature. These are the things that are going to be dealing most of the damage in the game, as well as protecting you from damage that your opponent sends your way. Unlike land cards, creature cards are a type of spell, and every spell has a cost. The cost of a card is pictured on the top right hand corner. These symbols tell you how much mana that you'll need to spend and what colour that mana needs to be. Every listed symbol that shows a specific colour means that at least that much of that mana that you spend needs to match those symbols. This card, for example, costs a total of 3 mana, but 1 point of that mana needs to be white, whereas the other 2 can be any colour as noted by the grey circle with a number 2 in it. Some cards will be multicoloured, but other more complex ones might ask for a variety of different magic colours as part of their cost. If you can't fulfill the colour requirements of a card, even if you have enough mana to cast it, then you can't cast it. Creatures enter the battlefield with what's known as summoning sickness, which basically means that they can't be used on the turn that they're played. Once they've dusted off the spawn goop though, creatures can be used to attack and defend during combat, and sometimes even activate special abilities. When used in combat, you'll need to look at the bottom right hand corner of the card to note their power and toughness. The power on the left of the slash is how much damage they dish out when they attack, and the toughness on the right hand side is how much damage they can take before they die. We'll talk more about combat later. Creature cards are placed in front of you to form a sort of battle line pointed towards your opponent, and your opponent will have their own line that mirrors yours. Every other type of permanent card is placed away from your creatures unless it's attached to one of them. It's also worth noting that some permanents are legendary, which means that whilst you can have multiple copies in your deck, only 1 copy can exist on your side of the battlefield. If you play a second copy of a legendary creature, you'll have to decide which one to get rid of. Let's look at some of those other permanents to see how they work. Enchantments can give you a permanent effect to either one of the players or one of their creatures. Standard enchantments will sit to the side, generally affecting the game, whereas aura enchantments will attach to another card to affect that card specifically. You might attach one to a creature, for example, to boost or nullifying it, making your creature stronger and your opponent's weaker. Equipment cards work like a mix of both. Initially they sit to the side of your play area like a standard enchantment, but you can pay their equip cost to attach them to one of your creatures. They're a little more tricky to get onto your creatures than a standard enchantment, but they're also not bound to the card that they're played onto, meaning you can equip them onto someone else whenever you like, as long as you have the mana for it, and they won't get destroyed when you lose that creature that they're equipped to. Lastly, the most complicated but also the most powerful permanent cards are Planeswalkers. These are legendary spellweavers that you've convinced to join your side and will perform one of 3 actions of your choosing for you every turn. Planeswalkers have an amount of what's known as loyalty. If their loyalty drops to 0 or lower, they'll leave the battle, so you can think of it basically like your health points. Each Planeswalker has a few different actions that they can perform on your turn, and you can pick 1 per turn to activate. To activate them, you'll adjust their loyalty by the amount it shows on the left of the ability that you want to use, but only if you have the amount of loyalty needed. A +1 ability, for example, can be cast every turn for free, but one that has -X value like this one, you'll need to build up to before you can achieve. These are all the most basic permanents, but as ever there's lots of different variations to mess around with that you'll learn about over time. Saga cards are like standard enchantments, but they do something every turn and destroy themselves when they're finished. Tokens are like other permanents, but they're not tied to a card, so once they're gone for good. But don't worry, you'll learn about those as time goes on. If we went over every card type, we'd be here forever, as this video would be defunct as soon as the new set arrives and they'd invent some new card type. But there's 2 more card types that I want to tell you about, and those are the 2 types of non-permanent cards. Non-permanent cards are one-shot spells that do what they say on the card and then they go away. It's as simple as that. They're split into 2 types, sorceries and instants. Sorceries have to be cast on your turn in one of the main phases, whereas instants can be cast at any time in the game, even when it's not your turn. You can use these to foil someone's plans or lay traps in combat, which make them super important. Just like permanents, you'll need to spend the required amount of mana to cast them, so if you want to cast an instant outside of your own turn, you'll need to make sure that you still have enough of your lands ready to spend. But hold on, what the hell is a main phase? Right, that's enough about the cards. Let's start talking about how you actually play this bloody thing. As I said before, Magic takes place over a series of turns, and each turn is divided into 5 phases. The first phase is your upkeep phase, and whoever takes the first turn of the game will have to skip this to balance out the benefit of going first. In the upkeep phase, you untap all your permanents, including your land cards, and draw 1 card from the top of your library. So basically, whoever takes the first turn will have 1 less card on their first turn. Next up is the first main phase. You get 2 of these per turn, 1 before and 1 after combat. The main phase is essentially the bit where you play your cards. You can play a single land card in either of these phases for free, but not in both, and you can play as many cards as you want, provided you have the mana to pay for them. The only spells that can be cast outside of these phases are instants, so this is where you'll be doing most of your card play. After the first main phase, and before the second, you'll take place in combat, which I'll tell you about in a second. Then, you finish your turn with the end step, in which you'll check your hand size is under the limit, and any creatures that took damage this turn but weren't destroyed will go back to their starting health. You keep doing these turns back and forth until one of you wins. All the phases are pretty self-explanatory, but let's go over how combat works, as that's the most complicated part. When you get to the combat phase, it's time to finally smash these creatures' heads together to see who comes out on top. It's also the main way of dealing damage to your opponent, so most of your game-winning plays will come in this phase. Whoever's turn it is will be able to select any number of untapped creatures that they control to attack their opponent with. Remember that you can't attack with any creatures that you spawned this turn, as they'll still have summoning sickness. By default, your creatures will be targeting your opponent's life total, but you can also have them target any Planeswalkers that your opponent controls as well to attempt to remove some of their loyalty. You can't target any creatures that your opponent controls directly, it's up to your opponent whether or not they'll take part in combat, but you can split your attacking creatures between the player and their Planeswalkers as you see fit. If a creature hits something in combat, whether it's a player or a card, it will do damage to it equal to the creature's power. That's the left-hand number, remember. The player who isn't currently taking their turn has the option to defend with any untapped creatures that they have available on the battlefield. A creature can block any single attacking creature, but can't block more than 1. You can, however, block a single attacking creature with multiple creatures at once to pool their damage together, although the attacker will get to decide in which order they'll block, one at a time, meaning they'll get to pick which creature takes the majority of the damage. It can be handy for combining a few smaller creatures together to try and take out a large one though. When a creature is dealt damage, it will be destroyed if the total damage dealt to it equals or exceeds that creature's toughness, which remember is the one on the right. Damage dealt to creatures doesn't necessarily persist between turns, and they'll heal back up to their total toughness during the end step, so if you want something killed, you've got to do it in 1 turn. The same isn't true for Planeswalkers though, because their loyalty can be whittled down over a few turns instead. Okay, I've taught you all the basic rules, so how about we break them now? As with most card games, a lot of the basic rules that you learn will usually have the word unless attached to them. You've already seen a couple examples of this. Every card costs mana to play, unless it's a land card, in which case you can play 1 per turn for free. Most of these rules exceptions come from keywords that your spells and creatures have. For example, only instants can be played outside of your turn or during combat, unless a card has the flash keyword, which allows things like creatures and enchantments to be played as if they were an instant. Let's go over some of the most prevalent ones in the game. As you know, creatures can't be used on the turn that they've been summoned due to summoning sickness, unless that card has haste, which means it doesn't suffer from summoning sickness and can attack or tap right away. Cards that have the flying keyword can't be blocked, unless the creature that blocks them has either flying themselves or the reach keyword, which, you guessed it, allows you to block flying creatures. When one creature damages another creature, it'll only destroy it if it does damage equal to or greater than their toughness, unless the creature dealing damage has the death touch keyword, which will destroy any creature it does damage to regardless of the amount. Creatures that are blocked can't deal damage to the opponent's life total unless they have trample, which deals any excess damage they deal, surplus to requirements, straight to the opponent's health. Any creature can block any other creature unless the attacker has menace, which means you'll need to block them with at least 2 creatures instead. Some keywords are less about breaking rules and more about adding them. Creatures with lifelink, for example, will give you health equal to the amount of damage they deal. So every time a creature with 4 power that has lifelink attacks, you'll add 4 health to your total after all the damage is dealt. First Strike and Double Strike allow you to deal damage before each attack starts, with Double Strike allowing you to deal damage before and during the attack. Creatures with one of the strike keywords are able to take out opposing creatures without taking any damage, as long as their power is equal to or greater than the creature's toughness, because they deal their damage before combat actually starts. That means the opposing creature will be dead before they can hurt them. There's even a few keywords that will allow your creatures to cheat death. The indestructible keyword is pretty self-explanatory. It can't be destroyed, either through damage or card effects. Hexproof, on the other hand, can save your permanents from enemy tampering, as anything with the hexproof keyword cannot be targeted by an opponent's spells or abilities. Sometimes you'll have a general hexproof, but others will only protect you from spells of a certain magic colour. The same goes for the final keyword I'll mention today, which is protection. Protection works like hexproof, but it'll also protect your creatures from damage as well. Cards will have something along the lines of protection from white written on them, which means that they can't be damaged, targeted, or affected by cards of that colour, including creatures. As I said before, there's a lot of keywords in Magic, like a stupid amount. The ones I've just mentioned are those that you're likely to see most often. Every new set will likely come with new rules and keywords that you'll need to learn to play with, so there's no sense listing every single one here. A lot of them will only show up very occasionally, and unless they have a lot of rules text on them, cards will usually explain what a keyword means in parentheses to help you out as well. So now you have all the basics of playing a game of Magic. It's time to talk about the other half of the card game experience. As with most card games, you play Magic with a customized deck of cards built before the game starts. A lot of the time, your performance in the game or the route that you take whilst playing will be predetermined by the deck that you build. So it's an important part of play, even if it's technically occurring before the game has actually started. So how do you build a deck for Magic the Gathering? Whilst it depends on the format that you're playing, the most basic principles are the same. So here's how to build a standard deck, and then some general tips that will work for anything. First things first, you'll need to choose a colour, or colours. The easier decks to manage are called mono, which basically means that they only use one colour. That's not to say that you can't make something interesting or competitive with just one colour of mana, but rather that the fewer colours that you use in your deck, the easier it will be to find the land cards that you need to support them. If you have a deck that's green and red, and you have an equal amount of red and green spells, then you can feasibly find yourself in a situation where you keep drawing green land cards and only have red spells to cast, which in general leaves you a little bit screwed. This becomes even more complicated when you're trying to play cards that require multiple colours of Magic. Just remember that when you're choosing what colours to put into your deck, with every extra colour you add, it will be harder to play the lands that you need to support your cards. So what's each colour like to play? Well, each has plenty of variety, but some of the more common features that you'll usually spot, no matter what set of cards you're drawing from, would be these. So red is the aggressive colour. It's full of creatures with haste, and it's great at rushing your opponent to try and take them down before they can get their engine up and running. Green, on the other hand, will usually bide their time, waiting to get enough lands out and then crush their opponents with these absolutely massive creatures that have loads of power and toughness. They love using mechanics like trample as well to overwhelm their opponents. White and black have a lot of similarities, but they approach the game in relatively opposite ways. Whereas white is great at buffing up their creatures, using lifelink to heal themselves and building up over time, black will instead focus on destroying creatures, both enemies and their own, and can use death to their advantage by summoning creatures from their graveyard or sacrificing their living ones for special benefits. Lastly, blue is the colour you play if you want to make your opponent angry. They'll cancel enemy spells, force your creatures to not untap, do something called milling, which I won't trouble you with just yet. Essentially, it's the arsehole colour, and I have no respect for anyone who plays with it. Anyway, most colours have some built-in synergies with others as well. With white and black being a good example, actually. Why just give yourself life when you can damage your opponent for every life you gain? In fact, the more colours that you open yourself up to, the wackier the deck that you build can be. It's just whether or not you can support that deck with an adequate amount of lands to make it work, which is the question. Once you've picked your colours, you'll want just over a third of your deck to be land cards. A standard deck should be a minimum of 60 cards, so you'll want about 23-ish land cards in total. If you've got more than one colour, then you need to decide how to split those land cards up, whether it's an even divide or you're favouring one colour over the others. Just remember, the more there is of a card in your deck, the more likely you are to draw it each turn. With your land cards as a base, it's time to start choosing spells to make up the rest of your deck. And first things first, you're going to need a lot of creatures. Creatures should be the second most prevalent thing in your deck, again making up a little over a third. As with all spells you add to your deck, you want to make sure that the cost of your creatures has a nice curve to it. What's a curve? Well, basically you want your creatures to gradually grow in cost steadily over the game to match the amount of lands that you'll have out at that point. So if you have a deck that's full of creatures that cost 5 magic or higher, you won't be able to play any of them for at least 5 turns. Equally, you might have low cost units in your deck, but if there's only a couple of them, the odds of you actually drawing them are pretty low. You need to find a nice balance in your deck so you aren't drawing only low cost or only high cost cards every turn. Finally, you can fill up whatever space you have left in your deck, any number of instants or enchantments and equipment and what have you. These cards are super useful, but you don't want to have an entire hand of them or you'll end up not being able to defend yourself against the enemy's attacks. When it comes to choosing what cards you actually fill all those boxes with, well, that's up to you. Building a deck in a card game is all about synergy. If you have lots of cards that are cool but don't really work together, you won't really be using them to their full potential. It's good to think of what you want to achieve with your deck before you start building it. Maybe there's a particular mechanic that you're exploiting, like lifelink or death touch. Maybe there's one mega powerful card that could win you the game, and the rest of your deck is just in service to getting it into your hand. Deck building is a complicated process, especially in Magic with so many cards at your disposal. Sometimes it's good to find pre-built decks and see how they tick so you can make your own with that knowledge. Most local board game shops can now offer you 30 card decks that you can try out and take home for free, which is a great starting point. Arena, the digital edition of Magic, will give you a deck of each colour to begin your playtime with, which will show you some of the combinations that you can pull off as well. You'll also unlock new multicoloured decks as you play. In general, Arena is a fantastic place to start your Magic journey if you don't mind a few free-to-play shenanigans. It will give you ample tutorializing and challenges, as well as an easy way to build decks and try them out without having to spend an absolute fortune on card packs and fill your home with half-empty deck boxes. So, there's a nice guide to how to play Magic the Gathering. I know it can be tricky to ingest all those rules at once, but once you sit down and start playing, I promise you it's actually pretty simple. You only ever need to know the keywords of the cards right in front of you, and you usually won't have that many to deal with in general. If you want an even more comprehensive guide to Magic and all its complexities, why not check out Dicebreaker.com? We've got all sorts of resources to help you with Magic and beyond, as well as news, reviews, and all sorts of tabletop features. The same goes here for youtube.com/Dicebreaker. If you haven't already, then please do hit subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified whenever we put a new video live. If you want to support the channel even further, you can also sign up for our new membership program, Dicebreaker Plus, which will get you access to exclusive videos behind the scenes every month and some nice little badges and emotes to use in chat. You can also grab some of our lovely merch at dicebreaker.myshopify.com. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you got something out of this and I hope it helped. And until I see you next, have a lovely day.